Hello, I am Sean Ramon Moore, and I am your instructor for this course. I'm going to introduce to you a topic that you've probably heard of, which is the title is reconciliation. It is used as it relates to banking. It's also used as it relates to social justice work. I am referring to it in a biblical sense. So when I use the word reconciliation, I'm talking about it in its biblical form. I'm going to define reconciliation. Then I'm going to give you the principles of spirituality. Then I'm going to give you the elements of reconciliation. Let us begin. So first and foremost, reconciliation is a spiritual endeavor that seeks to remove barriers that hinder authentic relationships. Again, like I said, it is a spiritual endeavor, which means we're dealing with the spirituality of an individual, which there's this connectedness between our minds and our bodies. It's what makes us aware. It also gives us a sense of mindfulness. It is also our creative being in us. There's also a mystical side to our spiritual selves that we really can't define. But again, as it relates to a biblical understanding of reconciliation, we first need to start with spirituality. So there are also principles to this, which there is love, which defining that is agape, which is an act of service. There's joy. This is the feeling of great pleasure and happiness. There's peace, which means freedom from disturbance. Endurance, the ability to deal with difficulties without giving up. There's goodwill, which means friendly, helpfulness, being creative. There's being principled, and being principled means acting in one's morality and showing recognition of right and wrong. There's the idea of being devoted, which is another way of saying loyalty. Then there's self-control, which is the ability to control emotions and desires. Now, there are also elements to reconciliation. And so as it relates to a biblical understanding of reconciliation, these might be spoken about in different parts of the Bible, and you might even have scholarly work that may take 2 or 3 of these. But when we're talking about reconciliation, it has to include all of these, which number 1 is story. So there's no such thing as reconciliation without first telling a story of some sort. There's lamenting. So there needs to be a lament of some sort as it relates to reconciliation. Of course, there's forgiveness. Forgiveness for what I've done, and then also being able to receive forgiveness. There's accountability. So if you're ever hearing someone talk about reconciliation and they don't drop the word accountability, how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to something better? Then you're not really talking about reconciliation. There is restoration, which how do we restore what was broken? Then there's justice. So the very first step in my model for reconciliation is what I call being. And when it comes to being something, it falls into 2 categories, which is Sabona, which is a South African term that means I see you or we see you. Then there's Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. So as it relates to this first step, we need to first and foremost admit that we are powerless as it relates to not being able to be reconciled with someone else. Like I've tried my best and I need to do this, so I need some help in doing so. Step 2 is to find hope. How can I find hope in something greater than myself? And this is where we're asking God to come into our lives and to give us the abilities and the powers to do so. Now, in my own personal understanding of reconciliation, I have what's called committed ways of being. And this is how I'm going to show up. Am I going to show up being inquisitive? Am I going to show up being able to be open? Am I going to show up to be creative? But as it relates to a committed way of being, I'm then saying to myself, how do I want to engage in something that's different from myself? There's also what we call a clearing. And if I'm engaging with someone who's different, there might be a tendency for me to always want to speak before listening, and so I need to clear that out. Lastly, there's always some sort of a ritual as it relates to reconciliation, and I will get into this as it relates to lamenting. Because whenever you're going to lament something, we always signify this with either a monument, a document, a flag, a statue, but we're gonna build something that says we're never gonna do that again. And lastly, share your story. Why am I here, and why do I want to hear from you? Step 2 in the process of reconciliation is becoming. And here's where I begin to ask the question, what do I need to become and who do I need to become for my most authentic self to show up? And it is this list of both and not either or. So here I'm going to surrender to a greater spiritual power, right? And so if I've been fighting this issue of how do I become reconciled with you, I needed to submit to I need to just do this. I need to start then taking an inventory and what are the things that make it difficult for me to truly hear what you're saying. And this is when you just kind of write out the list of all the things that you feel about yourself that hinder you from being in an authentic relationship with someone else, whether it is someone from a different ethnic group, someone who might be your partner, your mate, your friend. But what is it that's keeping you from being reconciled? And it's okay to say, I was hurt in these ways, so I was hurt in this way, and this is the reason why it's hard for me to want to be reconciled with this. How do we do this? We do this by being accountable, which means we all have homework that we have to do. So again, reconciliation is this spiritual endeavor that manifests itself into real life steps. And so it might mean I need to seek out counseling. It might mean that I need to do some sort of restoration act. It might mean that I don't know a great deal about your people or where you come from, so I need to read upon it. But there's no such thing as I want to be reconciled to you and not be willing to do some form of work to help me be reconciled with that person. Step 3 in the process of reconciliation is writing out best practices. So step 1 is building community, right? So we do community building using Sabona and Ubuntu. Then we move into co-creation, which we're both engaging in what does it mean to do this work. But then step 3 is we have all these new ideas, all these ideas that we want to implement. We then need to put them in a working form, and this is when we start to write out our covenants, right? And so we write out the best practices, and basically we are creating a new code. And in doing so, then we start sharing our inventory with those that are with us. Part 2 was I'm writing all the things that make it hard for me to want to engage with you. And step 3, I'm now sharing those things. I want to be open and frank and saying, hey, I really struggle as it relates to these types of issues, and I just need to be honest with you in doing so. So we're going to share our inventory with the group in which we're working with. We need to be ready for change, right? So we need to be ready for change. But again, it can be very, very hard to write out these things that keep you from being reconciled. But then to share them in an open format is also very hard. But again, this is the hard work we have to do for reconciliation. And again, we're always going to be asking God to give us the power, to give us the strength, so that we can continue to do reconciliation work. And then we make a list of amends. So we've wrote out the things that make it hard for us. We've shared those things. And then we're going to make a list of all the people that we need to go and be reconciled with or needs to make an amends. And that can be a very difficult process to go to someone and say, here's how I believe I've wronged you. How can I make this right? And so then how do we do this? Through pastoral care, through coaching, again, through therapy, through having accountability. But we need to be held accountable to doing these things. And that's step 3. Step 4 in my process of reconciliation is called doing. We do the work. This is when we start to live out the code, or what I like to call mastery. And so when we are in the mastery stage, we are then making an amends. So how do you actually make an amends? Well, it's a 3-part process. Step 1 is you go to the person and you tell them what you believe that you've done to cause harm. So you're going to tell them what you've done to cause harm. Step 2 is you need to tell them how you believe this impacts them and their community. And step 3 is then you're going to ask, how can I make this better? And I think all of it's pretty scary, but the most scariest part for someone like myself is to ask, what can I do? Because once they tell you what can be done, it's now up to you to do that particular thing. Keeping in mind, you've caused the harm. You've caused the harm, you've done the wrong, and now you're going to make an amends for it. And sometimes we want to just say, I'm sorry. And sorry is not an amends. Sorry puts pressure back on those that have been victimized. When you say, I'm going to make an amends, you recognize, A, I've done wrong. 2, here's how this wrong impacts you and your community. And step 3 is, how can I make this better, right? So we want to continue with our inventory of continuing to check in with our group of reconcilers that we're doing this with. We also want to improve a greater contact with God and those around us. And we want to help others doing so, right? So then at this point, we can now begin to measure how we're actually doing reconciliation. Because again, step one was building community. Step two were creating these ideas. Step three was writing them out. But step four is actually doing these things. And you can now begin to measure what you said you were going to do with what you're actually doing. So you can then begin to measure how you're actually engaging in reconciliation. And now when you're done with steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, what do? You go back to step 1. You go back to that same community. You do the same process over and over again. And so in my understanding of reconciliation, it is build community, co-create, write new covenants, mastery, then start all over again.